is a particular kind of fear that only infrastructure can create. Rails and bridges, for example, this is not fear of something dangerous, nor is it fear of the unknown. It is fear of scale. The structure around you is so large, so deliberately placed, and so incongruous with the existing landscape that your normal sense of proportion is completely distorted. A bridge you drive over makes you forget you are driving a car for a brief moment. The train takes you through such extreme scenery that the tracks stretching out below you, the fact that someone laid tracks on this mountain, in this valley, at this altitude, become more striking than what you see out the window. This fear is not an unpleasant feeling. It is the feeling of encountering something that requires more thought, time, human effort, calculation, and risk than you can calculate. It is the feeling of being part of a decision made by people you will never know. Solving a problem you were unaware of before you were born today. We will experience this feeling countless times. Bridges that span distances beyond what the eye can measure. Railways that climb mountains that can never be climbed. Passages that took decades to imagine. Years to build, and were worked on day and night. Through storms and fog and slowly accumulating seasons. As if crossing impossible distances were the most ordinary thing in the world. This is not an ordinary thing. None of this is ordinary. And when you reach the end of this, the next bridge you cross, any bridge, even a small bridge, a bridge you've crossed 10,000 times, will look different to you. If you agree with me, let's meet in the comments. Color was a choice. This seems obvious. Everything about a bridge is a choice. But the color of the Golden Gate Bridge was almost not a choice. The United States Navy wanted the bridge painted with black and yellow stripes to improve visibility for aircraft. The military, however, wanted the standard battleship gray. There was considerable indecision. Architect Irving Morrow wanted a color that would complement the unique light of San Francisco Bay, the fog. The sun filtering through the fog. The image of light on the water where the Pacific meets the bay. He chose international orange. This color is warm enough to be visible against the cold blue of the water and the gray of the sea layer. Instead of reflecting light, this color would absorb it, giving the bridge an appearance that changed throughout the day as the light changed. At dawn, before the city awoke, the towers appeared through the fog as if they were generating their own heat. At noon, in the open air, the cables caught the sun, and the entire structure seemed to shimmer with color. When the fog came, the famous San Francisco fog that wiped out the lower half of the towers, leaving only their upper sections visible above the cloud layer, the orange color read like a warning. A sign, a fixed point in a world cloaked in white. The bridge was built during the Great Depression, a time when resources for its construction were scarce and the need to build it was incredibly great, proving that difficult and expensive things were still possible. Chief engineer Joseph Strauss proposed the bridge in 1921. However, after 11 years of approvals, financing disputes, engineering debates, and political resistance, the groundbreaking ceremony was held. Earthquakes, tidal currents, and the full force of Pacific storms passing through the strait had to be factored into the design of what was then the largest suspension bridge ever built. The main span was 1,280 meters. The towers are 227 meters above sea level. Cables, each 0.9 meters in diameter and consisting of 27,572 separate wires, lifted a deck that carried approximately 100,000 vehicles per day. 11 workers lost their lives during construction. Before the bridge opened, this number was remarkable at that time. Dozens of people usually lost their lives in the construction of similar projects. Strauss insisted on installing safety nets beneath the deckwork areas, and these nets caught 19 workers who fell during construction, saving their lives. They called themselves the Halfway to Hell Club. One foggy morning, you're standing at Fort Point below the South Approach. Towers loom overhead. Cables, hanging down at a height that forces you to tilt your head back to gauge them, reach toward you. The sound of traffic on the deck above is muffled by the stone and distance. And the orange color of the bridge, against the grayness of everything else, is the most reassuring color you've seen so far. "24 miles of bridge, and for most of those miles, you cannot see land." This is not a metaphor for isolation. It is a literal description of the driving experience on the Lake Pontchartrain Causeway in Louisiana. At the midpoint of the crossing, in any direction the eye turns, there is water. Not a distant shoreline. Not a hint of land at the periphery of vision. Just the surface of the lake, extending to the horizon in every direction. And the bridge running through it like a seam in fabric, the Lake Pontchartrain Causeway is the world's longest continuous bridge over water. It crosses the lake in a nearly straight line, connecting Metairie on the southern shore near New Orleans with Mandeville on the northern shore. Before the bridge existed, the journey around the lake took over an hour. The crossing takes approximately 30 minutes. Engineering-wise, it is not actually extraordinary in terms of height or span. The bridge is a beam structure, the simplest and most straightforward form of bridge engineering, and is supported by approximately 9,500 concrete piers driven into the lake bed at regular intervals. No span is remarkable. No single element of the structure stands out on its own. What is remarkable is the whole, the commitment to maintaining this simple structural system over 24 miles of open lake, under conditions that include constant challenges such as hurricane-force winds, storm waves, and protecting the foundations in soft lake bed sediments. The psychological experience of crossing the bridge is different from other bridges in the world. Monotony is important. The bridge does not change. The scenery does not change. Feet pass at the same intervals. The road maintains the same width. The expansion joints between the bridge deck sections make a rhythmic sound as tires pass over them. This sound becomes a hypnotic rhythm for 24 miles. People have reported experiencing the trance-like state. People have reported feeling disconnected from the reality of driving, experiencing the sensation that the bridge is moving and they are stationary. People have reported experiencing an endless dizziness within the absolute monotony of the bridge. Have you ever experienced this? Let's meet in the comments. In a fog, the causeway disappears entirely after the first few hundred meters. You are driving across a bridge that you cannot see, over a lake you cannot see, toward a shore you cannot see. The only evidence that the structure continues is the sound of the tires on the joints and the painted lines of the lane ahead. This is not a beautiful experience in the conventional sense. It is an experience of a completely different kind, the experience of what engineering looks like when it strips away everything except function. When the only question is whether this specific quantity of people and goods can cross this specific body of water in this specific time. And the answer is yes, and the answer is 24 miles of concrete piers in a lake. The numbers in the name are engineering. The 1915 Çanakkale Bridge, opened in March 2022 at the Dardanelles Strait in northwestern Turkey, takes its name from the year of the Gallipoli Campaign, the World War I naval engagement in which Ottoman forces defeated an Allied fleet attempting to force the strait. The main span of the bridge is 2,023 meters. commemorating the centenary of the Turkish Republic, which was declared in 1923. The towers rise to a height of 318 meters, the same as the height of Istanbul's iconic K.A. Malika Tower, the cannon barrel. Shapes at the tops of the towers reference Ottoman artillery. Every dimension, in other words, is a statement. This is architecture in the service of historical memory, which is not unusual for large public infrastructure. The Golden Gate Bridge is a statement about San Francisco's capacity and ambition. The Milla Viaduct is a statement about the relationship between engineering and landscape, but the 1915 Çanakkale carries its symbolism more explicitly and more personally than most. What the numbers also describe is the world's longest suspension bridge main span. The previous record holder, Japan's Akashi Kaikyo Bridge, held that record for over 2 decades. At 2,023 meters, the Çanakkale Bridge's main span exceeds the Akashi by approximately 32 meters, a margin that, at this scale, represents an enormous engineering step. The Dardanelles Strait is approximately 1.2 to 6 kilometers wide at various points, and it carries one of the world's busiest waterway traffic flows. Tankers, container ships, and naval vessels transit the strait between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. The bridge's towers stand in water, and the clearance beneath deck allows the full range of vessel traffic to pass beneath it without interruption. Driving across the 1915 Çanakkale Bridge means crossing the boundary between Asia and Europe. The continents, which the strait has separated for the full history of human civilization in this region, are now connected by a deck that you can cross in minutes. The towers, red and white, the colors of the Turkish flag, are visible from a great distance on both approaches. And their scale, even from that distance, is not what you expect. The Dardanelles has been crossed by armies and navies and traders for thousands of years. The bridge is the first fixed connection. It is the newest thing in a landscape full of ancient things, and it makes the crossing so ordinary that the history of everything that came before it becomes, for a moment, more vivid by contrast. Japan is a country of earthquakes. This is not metaphorical background. It is the central engineering fact of the Akashi Kaikyo Bridge, which spans the Akashi Strait between Kobe and Awaji Island, a strait that sits in one of the most seismically active zones in Japan, a country that already has one of the highest seismic risks in the world. The bridge was under construction when the Great Hanshin earthquake of January 1995 struck. The earthquake, which killed over 6,000 people and caused catastrophic damage to Kobe, moved the 2 foundation anchors of the bridge, the massive concrete caissons embedded in the seabed, by approximately 1 meter, relative to each other. The main span, which had been designed at 1,990 meters, was now 1,991 meters. The engineering team had to recalculate the cable geometry for the revised span. The bridge opened in 1,998. Its main span of 1,991 meters held the world record for the longest suspension bridge span for 24 years, until the 1915 Çanakkale Bridge surpassed it in 2022. Its towers rise 282.8 meters above the water. The main cables, each one composed of 36,830 individual high-strength steel wires, are designed to withstand forces of seismic events and wind conditions far beyond anything ever recorded in the strait. The wind design is particularly demanding. The Akashi Strait is a narrow channel between the Seto Inland Sea and Osaka Bay, and the pressure differential that in these two bodies of water creates persistent, powerful winds that funnel through the channel with an intensity that open ocean conditions do not produce. The bridge deck is shaped as a truss, an open lattice rather than a solid surface, so that wind passes through it rather than pushing against it as it would against a solid plate. The aerodynamic behavior of this shape was tested in wind tunnels for years before the design was finalized. Driving across the Akashi Kaikyo Bridge, you are on a deck that sits approximately 65 meters above the water at the center of the main span, between towers that rise over 200 meters above the deck. The strait is visible in both directions. Container ships pass below on the shipping lane that runs through the center of the span. On clear days, both Kobe and Awaji Island are simultaneously visible. The bridge is not just engineering. It is a response to a specific catastrophe. When the earthquake moved its foundations and the engineers recalculated and continued, they were demonstrating something about the relationship between Japanese engineering culture and the geological reality of the islands those engineers build on. The earthquake happened. The bridge was completed. The strait is crossed. There is a place in Guizhou province where two expressways needed to meet, and the ground between them was not ground. It was a gorge. Not a narrow gorge. A gorge 1,341 meters wide from rim to rim, with the Beipan River running at the bottom at an elevation 565 meters below the rim. To put that in terms of familiar scale, 565 meters is approximately the height of the Burj Khalifa. The bridge that would need to cross it would have to begin and end in solid rock at either rim and span at that elevation. An open void equivalent to standing on the observation deck of the world's tallest building and looking down to the ground. The Panjiang Bridge was opened in 2016. Its main span is 720 meters. It is a cable-stayed bridge, a form in which the deck is supported by cables radiating directly from the towers rather than suspended from main cables as in a suspension bridge, which meant that the towers could be positioned closer to the rims and the cables could directly support the sections of deck that extended over the void. Challenge was not primarily the span. Long cable stayed bridges had been built before. The challenge was the wind. At 565 meters of elevation in a deep mountain gorge, the wind behavior is not modeled by standard meteorological data. The canyon creates its own wind dynamics, with accelerations, reversals, and pressure differentials that the bridge deck must withstand reliably every day. Under full traffic loading, the deck was designed and tested aerodynamically. The approach roads required viaducts and tunnels through the limestone karst terrain of Guizhou, terrain that is simultaneously spectacular to look at and nightmarish to build through, with caverns, sinkholes, and unpredictable rock quality at every excavation. Before the bridge opened, the journey between the two expressway termini took approximately 4 to 5 hours along mountain roads. The bridge crossing takes approximately 1 minute. 1 minute versus 5 hours. That ratio, the ratio of the journey before infrastructure to the journey after it, is what motivates extreme engineering. Not the elegance of the solution. Not the record it sets. The simple, practical, transformative fact that a journey which consumed most of a working day now consumes a fraction of a minute. And the economic and human consequences of that change compound over every vehicle and every year for the life of the structure. The Tarn Valley does not suggest that a bridge should cross it. It suggests the opposite, that the road should descend, cross at the bottom, and climb again. That is what valleys mean, geographically. That is what the terrain requests. And for decades, the road did exactly that, descended into the valley near Milau, passed through the town, climbed out, and deposited traffic that had been traveling freely at motorway speeds into the congestion of a town that was not designed for that volume or that speed. The congestion at Milau in summer, before the viaduct, was among the worst in France. The A75 motorway connecting Paris to the Mediterranean passed through a town center, because the road had been built in the era of a different traffic volume. And the traffic had grown beyond what that era had imagined. The solution, decided in the 1990s, was to build the road across the valley rather than through it. Not down into it. Across it, at plateau level, in a single continuous span that would carry traffic above the valley without any interaction with the terrain below. Norman Foster's design is a cable-stayed structure. 7 pylons standing on the valley floor, each one carrying a mast above the deck from which cables radiate to support the roadway. The tallest pylon and mast combination reaches 343 meters, taller than the Eiffel Tower. The deck sits at approximately 270 meters above the valley floor. At its highest point, the deck is not straight. It follows a gentle curve in plan, a radius of 20 kilometers, which was chosen for 2 reasons. It gives drivers a visual reference as they cross, preventing the disorientation of a perfectly straight, perfectly flat road suspended between sky and valley floor. And it creates a visual appearance from below and from the surrounding hillsides that is not the geometry of a purely functional structure. The curve makes the viaduct read as something considered, something shaped, not merely placed. Construction advanced from both ends simultaneously. The deck segments pushed outward over open air on temporary towers until the sections met in the center. At no point during construction did any major construction equipment work from the valley floor. The valley floor was left undisturbed throughout. The viaduct opened in December 2004 on a foggy morning, which is common in the valley. The pylons descend into the cloud and the deck appears to float without support above a white nothing. Drivers report the sensation of flying. The valley that was once a source of summer frustration has become a destination. People drive to Millau specifically to see the viaduct, to photograph it, to stand on the hillsides and watch traffic move through the sky. To understand the Sidu River Bridge, you need to understand the terrain of western Hubei province. The region is defined by gorges. The mountains here are not rounded hills that slopes gradually connect. They are vertical, cut by rivers that have been carving downward through the rock for millions of years, leaving canyon walls that drop hundreds of meters with no intermediate terrain. Travel between the plateaus on either side of these gorges, before bridge infrastructure existed, meant descending to the canyon floor on roads that zigzagged back and forth across the cliff face, crossing the river and climbing back up the other side. Hours, for a horizontal distance of a few hundred meters. The Sidu River flows at the bottom of one of these gorges in Badong County. When the Sidu River Bridge was completed in 2009, it stood at 496 meters above the river, the tallest bridge in the world at the time of its completion. The main span is 900 meters, carrying a 4-lane expressway between 2 sections off-road that without the bridge would require a descent and ascent of nearly a kilometer of vertical change. The construction challenge specific to this site was the installation of the main cables across the. 。  . 。 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 The gorge is too wide and the walls too sheer for conventional cable installation methods. The cables were installed using rockets. Small rockets fired across the gorge, carrying lightweight pilot lines, which were then used to pull progressively heavier lines across, until the main cable strands could be hauled into position. This is not a metaphor. Rockets were fired across this gorge to string the cables of this bridge. The method, while unusual, solved a problem that had no conventional solution: how to establish a connection across a 900-meter void with vertical walls when no equipment can operate from the gorge floor. Driving across the Sidu River Bridge at 496 meters of elevation. The river below is not clearly visible as a river. It is a pale line between dark walls. Its scale reduced by the distance until it reads as a drawing of a river rather than a river. The walls of the gorge are at deck level on either side. The cliff face is visible in full detail. And the exposure, the feeling of being in the open air at that elevation, in a landscape that offers no shelter and no gradual approach to its scale, is total. There's a particular quality to wooden deck bridges that steel and concrete cannot replicate: the sound, first. When wind moves across a wooden deck, when footsteps fall on planks rather than on composite or concrete, when the structure responds to load with the slight, organic flexibility of wood rather than the rigid indifference of modern materials, the bridge announces itself. It speaks. Standing on the Royal Gorge Bridge in Colorado, 291 meters above the Arkansas River, the bridge is not silent. It creaks when the wind moves. It vibrates slightly when someone walks nearby. The handrails, when gripped, transmit a subtle movement that is less alarming than informative. The structure is alive under your hands, responding to the forces on it in real time. The Royal Gorge is a narrow canyon cut by the Arkansas River through granite. The walls are nearly vertical and rise over 300 meters from the river. The river at bottom, the same river that carved this canyon over millions of years, runs in emerald green over pale gray granite. And from the bridge deck it appears as a thread, as a suggestion of water rather than water itself. The bridge was completed in 1929. Which makes it nearly a century old and raises the obvious question: what does it mean to stand on a suspension bridge from 1929 that is still carrying visitors across a 300-meter void? It means that the engineering of 1929, properly maintained, is entirely adequate to the task. The main cables, the towers, the anchorage system, these were designed correctly the first time. And 90 years of maintenance have kept them correct. The Royal Gorge Bridge is no longer among the tallest bridges in the world. The Sidu, the Panjiang, and others have surpassed it by hundreds of meters. But height is not the only thing a bridge can offer. The Royal Gorge Bridge offers time. It offers the specific gravity of a structure that has been crossing this canyon for longer than most of the people crossing it have been alive. It offers the creak of wood under your feet and the view down through nearly 300 meters of granite to the river. That made the canyon that made the bridge necessary. The Florida Keys are a chain of islands, and the road that connects them to each other and to the mainland is necessarily a bridge for most of its length. The overseas highway runs 183 kilometers from the mainland to Key West, crossing island after island with open water between. The 7-mile bridge is the longest individual span of this route, technically 6.79 miles, or 10.9 kilometers, crossing Florida Bay in a long arc that makes it, for most of its length, A road surrounded by water with no land visible in any direction, except along the bridge itself. The water here is spectacular in the way that only very shallow, tropical water can be. To the east, Florida Bay, the Gulf of Mexico side, runs in pale turquoise over seagrass meadows and sand. To the west, the Atlantic, which in the Keys means the Florida Straits, runs in deeper blue-green, the color shifting with depth and the angle of the sun. Early in the morning, when the light is low and the water surface catches it directly, the bridge appears to float on a surface of polished metal. The original 7-mile bridge, the one built in the early 20th century as part of Henry Flagler's Florida East Coast Railway, before the railway was destroyed by the Labor Day hurricane of 1935 and converted into a road, still stands parallel to the current bridge in many sections, preserved as a pedestrian and fishing pier. The old bridge is visibly older, its proportions different, its materials aged, its relationship to the water more intimate. Driving on the new bridge, you can look to one side and see the structure that preceded it. The same crossing made in an earlier vocabulary, driving the 7-mile bridge in the late afternoon, heading southwest toward Key West, with the sun ahead and the water on both sides, catching the last direct light of the day, is one of the more extraordinary ordinary drives available in the United States. The bridge itself is the destination, not the islands it themed. The bridge and the water, and the specific quality of light that belongs only to the Florida Keys and the hour before sunset. Prince Edward Island has been an island in the practical sense, isolated by the Northumberland Strait, accessible only by ferry or air, and carrying the particular cultural and economic character that island isolation produces for as long as there have been people on it. The Confederation Bridge changed that in 1997. The bridge is 12.9 kilometers long, connecting the island to New Brunswick on the mainland. It is the world's longest bridge over ice-covered waters. The Northumberland Strait freezes seasonally, which created a structural challenge that most bridge engineering does not encounter. Ice does not behave like open water. It accumulates against foundations, exerts horizontal forces as it moves with current and wind, and creates impact loads when large ice masses strike piers. The piers of the Confederation Bridge are designed with conical collars at the waterline, a shape that directs ice upward as it contacts the pier, causing it to break by bending rather than by compressive impact. A pier that must withstand ice compression needs to resist the full force of the ice. And ice can exert enormous compressive forces. A pier that breaks the ice as it approaches needs to withstand only the force required to bend the ice, which is significantly lower. The bridge took 4 years to build. From 1993 to 1997, Northumberland Strait is shallow, an average of about 35 meters, but the tidal currents and ice conditions limited the working periods available to construction crews. The precast concrete segments that form the bridge structure were manufactured on land, transported by barge, and lifted into position, a sequencing that reduced the time that workers and equipment spent in the water. Prince Edward Island is still an island, but it is no longer isolated in the way that geographical islands usually are. The bridge made the journey from the mainland routine, and in making the journey routine, it changed what it means to live there, the supply chains, the seasonal rhythms, the economic connections, the relationship between the island and the continent. It is no longer entirely separated from. A bridge is always more than its span. It is a renegotiation of what distance means. The Resund Bridge is not finished at either shore. The crossing from Malmö in Sweden to Copenhagen in Denmark involves two forms of infrastructure that most crossings do not combine. A cable-stayed bridge running from the Swedish coast to an artificial island in the middle of the strait, and a tunnel running from that island beneath the seabed to the Danish shore. The island, Pebberholm, created from the material excavated from the tunnel, is the transition point, the place where the crossing changes form. The reason for the combination is navigation. The Resund Strait carries heavy maritime traffic, both commercial and naval, and a high bridge over the full width of the strait would have required clearances that were either structurally extreme or navigationally inadequate. A tunnel under the full width would have required ventilation systems of a scale that was impractical. The hybrid solution, bridge where the water is shallower and a tunnel under the main navigation channel, addressed both constraints. Simultaneously, the bridge section is 7.8 kilometers long and carries both 4 lanes of road traffic and 2 rail tracks. One of the few bridges in Europe designed for combined road and rail use. The rail connection is the feature that makes the crossing most significant for daily life. The train journey between Copenhagen and Malmö takes approximately 35 minutes, a duration that makes the two cities, which are in different countries, effectively part of the same commuter region. Resund has become a cross-border metropolitan area, a region of approximately 4 million people who live on both sides of the crossing and for whom the nationality of the side they sleep on is a relatively minor consideration compared to the daily geography of work, education, and movement. The bridge made this possible. The bridge did not create the cultural or economic compatibility between the two cities that existed before the bridge, but it made the physical expression of that compatibility possible at the scale of daily life. Resund Bridge opened in 2000. In less than 25 years, a new metropolitan geography has organized itself around it. The conventional approach to a mountain viewpoint is a path or a cable car, or both. The Langkawi Sky Bridge offers a third option, a bridge that is itself the viewpoint, suspended from a single pylon 82 meters high, curving outward from the mountain to provide a 360-degree perspective that no fixed platform can achieve, because a platform can only look outward from one elevation. And this bridge is the elevation. The bridge is 125 meters long, gently curved and built entirely of steel. The deck, the railings, the supports that extend outward and downward from the main cable to stabilize the structure against the lateral loads that wind imposes on a curved, cantilevered form. It sits at an altitude of approximately 700 meters above sea level on Gunung Mat Sinkang, one of the higher mountains on Langkawi Island. Reached by a cable car from the base station near Talaga Harbor, the view from the bridge encompasses Langkawi Island, the Andaman Sea, the surrounding archipelago, and on clear days the coastline of Thailand to the north. In fair weather, the definition is extraordinary. The individual colors of the water at different depths, the forest on the island ridges below, the scale of the view that only elevation provides. In fog, which comes frequently and moves quickly in this climate, the bridge sits in cloud and the handrails extend into whiteness, and the perspective contracts to the few meters of bridge immediately visible. Both versions of the experience are their own thing. The clear day view is what people come for. The fog is what people remember. The bridge underwent a significant refurbishment in 2015 after structural concerns led to its closure. The original design had not fully accounted for the dynamic behavior of the curved, single cable-supported form under combined wind and pedestrian loading. The refurbished bridge is a safer, more thoroughly analyzed structure than the one that opened. This is not a failure of the original engineering. It is the normal process by which understanding of novel structural forms improves over time. The glass floor is not the engineering challenge. Glass is a well-understood structural material. Laminated glass panels designed for floor use, multiple layers bonded together so that if one cracks, the others maintain integrity, have been used in pedestrian bridges and observation decks for decades. The structural behavior is calculable. The loads are known. The safety factors are established. The engineering challenge of the Zhangjiajie glass bridge in Hunan province was the context, a 430-meter span, 300 meters above the floor of the Zhangjiajie Grand Canyon. In a landscape of vertical sandstone pillars, that is itself one of the most visually extreme terrains in China. The bridge had to anchor into rock faces that were not designed by engineers, but by erosion. In a geological context where the rock quality varied and where the forces imposed by wind at this elevation, and in this terrain had no precedent. Bridge is 6 meters wide and is designed for a maximum simultaneous capacity of 800 people. Though operations typically limit access below this maximum to maintain the experience. The glass panels, 99 panels, each 3 layers of tempered glass, are the floor of the deck, with the structural steel frame visible above and beside them. The psychological experience of walking on it bears examination. The height is 300 meters. The glass is transparent. The valley floor is visible through the material you are standing on. Every human being who steps onto this bridge is walking directly over a 300-meter drop with nothing between their feet and the void except material that, in every other context in their lives, is associated with fragility. The material is not fragile. The engineering is correct. The glass panels have been tested by being struck with sledgehammers and maintaining integrity. But the body does not know this, and the feet, which have their own relationship with height that is independent of what the mind knows, respond to what the eyes show them. That gap between what is known to be safe and what is felt to be dangerous is the entire experience of the Zhangjiajie glass bridge. It is a structure designated specifically to place you in that gap and keep you there for the length of the crossing. That is also a thing that trains can do. Perhaps the most human thing they do. These structures, the bridges and the railways, the spans and the tracks, share one quality that is not obvious from their dimensions or their records or their engineering specifications. They are all answers to questions that were asked before the answers were possible. Michigan is 2 peninsulas separated by a strait, and for most of its history as a state. That separation was an operational fact that shaped everything. The economies of the upper and lower peninsulas developed differently. The populations were different, and the only connections were ferries that were slow in good weather and impossible in bad. The Mackinac Bridge, opened in 1957, is a suspension bridge spanning the Mackinac Strait, the narrow waterway connecting Lake Michigan and Lake Huron, roughly 5 miles wide at the crossing point. The total length of the bridge, including the approach spans, is over 8 kilometers. The main suspension span is 1,158 meters, making it one of the longest in the world. The specific engineering detail that most surprises visitors is the deck design. The two inner lanes of the 4-lane bridge are surfaced not with concrete or asphalt but with open steel grating, a mesh through which the water below is clearly visible. In vehicles with low seating positions, the view through the floor of the road beneath the wheels to the water 60 meters below is direct and unobstructed. This design choice was not made for the experience it creates, though the experience is undeniable. It was made for structural reasons. The open grating reduces the wind load on the deck by allowing air to pass through rather than push against a solid surface. The Mackinac Strait is known for its winds, lake winds that move without the friction of terrain to slow them, carrying the full speed that open water allows. A solid deck in those winds would create lateral forces that the suspension system would need to resist. An open deck reduces that load substantially. The effect for drivers, particularly in the outer lanes, which have solid decks, but with the inner lanes mesh visible, is a particular version of the exposure that elevated structures produce. The water is not suggested. It is there, directly below, visible through the road you are driving on. There are services available for drivers who are unable or unwilling to cross the bridge independently. Staff will drive your vehicle across for you. This service is used regularly, without judgment, by people who have made this calculation honestly. These structures, bridges and railways, spans and tracks actually shared a feature that was not immediately apparent from their dimensions, records, or engineering characteristics. They are all answers to questions that were asked beforehand but cannot be answered. The Akashi Kaikyo Bridge was proposed for decades before the engineering existed to build it. The Jungfrau Railway was conceived when drilling through the Alps for 16 years was the only method available, and the altitude that resulted was without precedent. The Darjeeling Railway solved an access problem with a technology, the rack and pinion loop and switchback system, that had to be specifically invented for the terrain it was crossing. The question came first. The answer came when the tools, the materials, and the accumulation of understanding finally caught up with what the question required. This is what distinguishes infrastructure from construction. Construction produces something that fits within the known. Infrastructure extends the known. It makes connections that were not possible before. It crosses distances that were barriers. It climbs heights that were limits. And then, having made the impossible routine, it becomes invisible. The bridge becomes the road. The tunnel becomes the commute. The climb that required 2 days by mule becomes a 45-minute cog railway. The next time you cross a bridge, in any country, at any scale, at any speed, look at it for a moment before you arrive on it. The question it was built to answer is written in every pier and cable and joint. The answer is the structure itself. And the fact that you are crossing it without thinking about either the question or the answer is the proof that the engineering succeeded. That is what success looks like, not a record, not a ceremony. The moment when the crossing becomes ordinary and no one on the bridge is thinking about the bridge at all.